Hey guys, so if you don't like it, you can always leave. I mean, this wasn't ever a valid criticism of libertarian arguments against the state. It's a logical fallacy known as ergo decado, otherwise referred to as the traitorous critic argument. In other words, it's an attempt to shift the burden of proof onto the person who's in the passive position proposing a question against an active party, and assassinating their character by implying that they're being ungrateful by dissenting against the active party. And I think no matter what, if you're an anarchist and you've been arguing for any length of time with statists, this is an argument which you've all heard at least once, and they only tend to start throwing this one around once they've been backed into a corner, so to speak. So I think a large part of why it's so popular is because it's one of those cognitively dissonant last resorts people employ to protect their preconceived worldview, but also from a cosmetic standpoint, the argument bears a striking similarity to points which aren't fallacious. If you don't like what I do on my property, then leave, for instance. The difference, of course, is that private property is a result of self-ownership and non-coercive voluntary interactions which either lead to the property being created or it being traded from one party to another. So the property owner is the passive party, and the person who's come onto the property owner's land and is attempting to tell them what to do is the active party. But with the state operates around coercion and doesn't have firm ethical justification for itself. So the state is the active party and the dissenter is the passive party. And the reason why it's important that the burden of proof is never on the passive party is that it's logically inconsistent to try and prove a negative. A great example which should be fresh in everyone's minds would be the whole Brett Kavanaugh fiasco. How exactly is Brett Kavanaugh supposed to prove that he didn't sexually assault anyone? Well, he can't really. That's why the burden of proof is always on the party making the claim, otherwise known as the active position, which in an ethical dilemma, the party initiating force is always the active position. And the logical problems with this argument aside, we have countless historical examples of people attempting to secede from the state all around the world, only for the states to kill them all. Two which everyone should be familiar with are the Ruby Ridge Ranch siege outside of Nampa, Idaho, and the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas. Yesterday, we have yet another example, and this one's particularly interesting as we're about to get into. So a husband and wife named Chad Elwertowski and holy fuck, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. Thankfully, she has a nickname, so I'll just call her by her nickname. Nadia Summergirl, respectively, attempted to seastead a cabin built by a seasteading organization known as Ocean Builders in international waters off the coast of Southeast Asia. And here's a short little video of the cabin for anyone who's interested. As you can see, it's not very big, and it's also not anchored. I mean, it has an anchor, but it's sort of like a buoy, and it's sort of pulled by a boat to wherever they want it to go. Essentially, for those who don't know very much about the concept, various organizations within the last decade, like the one who this couple was affiliated with, have been investing quite heavily in semi-amphibious, autonomous properties designed to freely float in the ocean as a permanent residence for the people who own the properties. This is being done for a variety of different reasons: environmentally conscious alternatives to housing, easy access to fishing, to please diving enthusiasts, or as a low-cost option for retirement. But mainly, seasteading has been an interest of libertarians and anarchists looking to secede from governments because, of course, seasteading opens up the possibility of setting up properties in territory not claimed by any governments of the world, so people living on these properties would, on paper, effectively be able to live without any state tyranny in their lives. And since these properties aren't stationary, it would be very difficult for a government to form because it would be nearly impossible to force people and compel them to associate with it, and consequently, it would be nearly impossible for such a centralized, monopolistic entity to collect revenue. Now, I haven't really been talking much about seasteading or its potential for individual secession on my channel. This is because, in my view, while seasteading is definitely the right direction you want to go if you want to live free from statism, since it's one of the few proposed methods that actually is libertarian in nature, so doesn't argue for submission to the idea of political authority like incrementalism does, or coercion and the implementation of another monopolistic system of political rule like insurrection does. It has several practical flaws which leave it vulnerable to, well, exactly what's happened here, which is that the Thailand government manufactured an excuse to use force against this couple for trying to secede. In their own words, and no, I am not making this up, by floating in their small cabin in international waters off the coast of Thailand, the couple was threatening Thailand's national sovereignty. But yeah, it's always been incredibly strange for me to watch other libertarians rant about the state being an unjust monopoly on arbitration and monopoly on violence, then somehow expect governments to just respect individuals trying to secede and create stateless territories, ergo depriving the state of revenue and creating a market which the state doesn't have any control over. And that's precisely why I've been relatively skeptical of the purported success these seasteading projects claim that they could produce. I knew that the moment people actually began starting to seastead and float these properties out into international waters, governments were going to start taking them down with force. And unlike with agorism, where you're creating a competing infrastructure of decentralized firms and arming the population so that they can defend themselves, along with making it easier to be self-sufficient and more profitable to trade around the state, with seasteading or similar forms of individual secession, there's nothing deterring the state from using force to stop you or ensuring that that can't happen. So here are the coordinates of where the house was located. As you can see, it's at least a good 100 miles out to sea from the mainland, 50 or so from the closest region Thailand claims dominion over, which is Phuket Island over to the left side here. And apparently this house was located within a patch of water known as the Exclusive Economic Zone of Thailand, or EEZ for short. So basically a patch of ocean the United Nations claims no one can commercially fish out of unless they have a permit from the government of Thailand. But even according to the United Nations, this is legally considered to be international waters. In other words, even according to the laws of the United Nations and the government of Thailand, there is no legal basis for the arrest of these two people. But then again, those laws are themselves defined on an arbitrary basis. In other words, the only reason they exist are because they're the opinions of people with an organization which has a monopoly on arbitration, meaning that they've just used coercion to make it so no one can legally disagree with them, and they can say that anything they want is a crime or a law. Laws in this system are basically just an opinion with the threat of violence to back it up. So, when I first read this story, I was furious, but not at all surprised given that governments regularly commit mass murder, i.e. go to war with each other over resources, and governments with more resources use coercion to strong-arm governments with fewer resources all the time through international cartels, or by instigating coups over economic policies. So, to think that a country working on behalf of the UN, since this is a UN trade bloc, wouldn't kidnap and kill a couple of people for trying to disassociate from the governments of the world and not be extorted, then you're frankly delusional. And I love how the media is significantly trying to downplay the fact that these people are crypto anarchists in order to try and stop the spread of crypto anarchism. Like, this outlet, for example, calls them a Bitcoin couple. What the fuck even is a Bitcoin couple? Why are they so scared to even mention crypto anarchism? I mean, I think we all know why, but seriously, imagine the state being so scared of your ideas that they don't even want to mention the name of your ideology. I mean, don't get me wrong, if there was a seasteading militia or an armed community of a few thousand seasteaded properties within a relatively close range to one another, and the people who created the properties had a local economy and were able to easily trade with people on land through some decentralized network, then I'd be more confident in such an endeavor, though I personally would sit out until agoras like this were to start forming more commonly on land, because the ocean is one of the few things which fucking terrifies me. I would not want a tiny little cabin like this floating in the middle of this giant body of water with all these giant creatures swimming underneath me in it and having no idea what's underneath or around my house at any given time. Like, you could be sitting on your porch and have a fucking whale jump out of the water for air 20 feet in front of you. Now, some people might find that to be captivating, but that would freak me the fuck out. And what about storms? Yeah, the waves aren't that bad when you're really far out, but what about whirlpools, water sprouts, or fucking hurricanes? But yeah, please share this story. We need to get everyone talking about this and crypto anarchism since the media seems to be too terrified to even mention it. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.